I'm not going to re-bring this up. I'm not going to like be an archaeologist, what's the term?
Archaeologist?
Archaeologist? Indiana
Yeah.
Jones. I'm not going to be
Yeah.
Indiana Jones and like
Yes.
dig up the thing you told me last month. And I think that's what people are afraid of.
Welcome to the Leadr Pulse podcast, the podcast with actionable insights for leaders revolutionizing the world of work. I'm Holly Tate, your host and Chief Marketing Officer here at Leadr. On today's episode, we get to talk with Frank Blake. Well, actually, Matt gets to talk with Frank Blake, and then I get to unpack with Matt what he learned from Frank around really understanding what is the role of a CEO and how do you balance the firefighting versus focusing on what's most important to moving your business forward today. Frank Blake is the former CEO of Home Depot. When he was at the helm, they had nearly 500,000 employees. And it's just an incredible honor to get to hear and learn from Frank today as we unpack what it looks like to be a true leader. So listen to what Matt and Frank had to say, and then Matt and I will unpack it together.
I'm an executive, and I'm trying to balance the firefighting and the priorities that pop up for me every Monday, but I'm losing touch with the front lines and I'm losing touch with my customers. What do I do?
So the first comment is that as a leader, I think it's important to understand that your job is not to make the most number of decisions the most efficiently. That in fact, your job is to pick the 4 or 5 things that really need to move in your organization and move those things deliberately and consciously over time. Someone had a great description for me. They came into my office at one point early on when I was CEO and said, "You're screwing this up." And I said, "How so?" And he did a little chart that showed a big gear at the top and then a lot of gears going down. And he said, look what happens if that top gear is spinning and, just frantically making decisions. All those bottom gears are spinning out of control. He said, your job is spin 4 or 5 big things. And then you need to be conscious of when the gears down below you are moving. Understand why they're moving and whether they're moving in the right or the wrong direction. So that's to say, as you prioritize your schedule as a leader, prioritize not the firefighting, figure out you ought to have a team on who you rely for firefighting activities. But you should be prioritizing making sure you're understanding what's happening in your organization, what's moving your organization, whether it's going in the direction you want.
Got it. Okay, that's gold. That's gold. And so I've got to ask this then. Why did you choose, of all of the gears that you could have chosen to pick when you were leading Home Depot, why did you choose the gear of I'm going to spend so much time at the stores? Because it seems to me most executives would say, I don't have time for that. I need to sit in the office at headquarters with everybody else. That feels like a strange gear to pick.
So I wouldn't say, just in fairness, if you looked at the percentage of my time, I'm not sure I spent more than 50% of my time in the stores, but I spent a lot more time in the stores than other leaders did or might have. And the answer is, so again, I have a theory of the case for how organizations work. I think organizations, for the most part, don't want their leader to understand what is actually happening. I tell leaders, that story about the frog that gets boiled. Just understand that you are the frog your organization's trying to boil. They don't like change. Organizations don't like change. They want to keep you in a controlled cocoon. So the first thing you need to do is to understand actually what's the temperature around you. What is actually happening? You're not going to find that by surrounding yourself with the people in headquarters. They're going to tell you what they have made it a career of figuring out what you want to hear and giving that to you. What you need to do is find out what's actually happening with your customers, with your vendors, and with your frontline employees.
Okay. Why not send someone else though? Because surely you had a number 2 or number 3 that you could have said, hey, go there and find out and then report back to me on what's really happening. Why make it a priority for yourself?
Well, I would say, why would you ask somebody else to tell you what's really happening? I mean, if
Right.
you're interested, if you're
Right.
saying my first obligation is to understand what's really happening,
Right.
why would I be sending somebody else to figure that out?
True.
And I mean, that's true for vendors, it's true for your frontline associates, and it's true for your customers. You ought to be having, and by the way, I was very reassured on this at some point. You know, this was while Bezos was still at Amazon. Had the chance to have a long lunch with him, and we kind of went through management strategies, how you think about growing businesses and the like. And I was very reassured that he had exactly the same point.
Really?
Yeah, very much.
Okay.
And he didn't have a physical store so much to
Sure.
walk around, but the customer insights, when customers would complain, getting close to those complaints, understanding them,
Yeah.
that was critical to how he managed his business, as it was with Jack Welch. When I worked for Welch, I saw the exact same thing. So the notion that the people around you are the people who are going to give you this great straight story, I think is a bit of a mistake.
So Matt, I mean, first of all, Frank Blake, it's like every sentence he says is jam-packed full of gold, but you freaking got to talk to Frank Blake, the former CEO of Home Depot. Like,
even now, hearing me talking to Frank Blake and talking about the fact that I was talking to Frank Blake is still like an out-of-body experience. It is surreal and cool and special, and what a privilege, what an honor, right?
It's so cool. He's brilliant. And so I just really appreciate the way that he challenges, like when it's so concise,
Yes,
but it's so challenging, what he shares. There was so much there,
so
Matt.
much.
Yeah. So I want to start with the very first question really that he starts talking about, which is, you know, it's not your job as the CEO to make decisions. It's to pick the right 4 to 5 gears that moves your business forward. So you're a CEO. So how did that hit you as far as like, wait, it is my job to make decisions, but picking the 4 to 5 things, how do you figure that out?
My first reaction, not response, was certainly, there's no way it's only 4 to 5. I was, I don't know if that's like an ego kick, Holly, but I literally thought I could do 10, no problem. And he goes on later to say, you might be able to do 10, but the organization couldn't. But that was actually my first reaction of 4 to 5. Really? There are way more than 4 to 5 dumpster fires happening at any given time at any company anywhere, right?
Yeah.
But it was such a challenging thought because there really is only a few key things that move the needle that need your attention at any given time. And what's the saying? Do 3 things you could do 5 things poorly or 3 things excellently. And so really choosing to narrow down on the few, I think, is so important. Or like Jim Collins, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have none. And so I think that really is the challenge. And I think anytime a leader, myself included, I'm speaking to myself, says, no, I could do 10. You probably could, but you shouldn't.
Yeah. What about, so when he talks about firefighting and he says you should have people on your team that are the firefighters, that was convicting for me because I spend quite a bit of my day firefighting. And so when I heard him say that, I was like, oh, like there are so many, well, you and I have been for the past, I don't know, about 6 months or so with our executive team have been putting in Slack. Well, we have like a little automated Slack reminder that says, what's the most important thing today? And I mean, it takes me usually probably about a minute to really think about the answer to that question, because most of the time I'm like, oh, well, I have 7 meetings and this thing that came up overnight, but those aren't the most important things. So the firefighting.
And you have to answer it without looking at your calendar, because that's the whole point. It's if the what's most important right now is just the longest meeting on your calendar, then you're at the behest of your calendar as opposed to your calendar being at the behest of what the priorities are. And I fall into that trap all the time. And it's a struggle for me to answer the question. And sometimes I find the answer is so spread and I am giving 10 different things that's most important. And then it's like, well, I'm missing the point.
Yes. Yeah. CJ, our CTO, challenged us on that.
Yeah.
Like, don't look at your calendar to answer this question. Really think about what is the priority for today.
And so, okay, you just reminded me of something. So when you said I find myself firefighting so often, it's because one of the reasons you've been promoted, one of the reasons we've been promoted over the years is because we were good at what we did. And so it's the Peter principle. You're good at firefighting, so you get promoted. You're good at firefighting, you get promoted. Peter principle is you rise to the level of your incompetence. And now our role is not firefighting, but I kind of like it.
I know that
I've said this to you before.
gratification.
I've said this to you before. I'm like addicted to the chaos. I like the change. I like the firefighting, but that's not our job anymore. And it's kind of hard to let go.
It really is that. I mean, I know for me, I mean, in literally science, like you get endorphins when you check things off a list or when you respond to that Slack or that email. And so it is addicting, especially when you're a high energy person.
What's the next thing? What's the next thing?
Yes. And then before I know it, it's a week's gone by and that big project that I needed to, move forward, didn't happen. I mean, actually, Matt reminds me of this podcast. Like here we are on episode 2 of this podcast. This has been something, I mean, I love podcasts. I've launched a podcast before at a previous organization I was a part of. My dream is like to be Jimmy Fallon one day. I think he's hilarious and so fun. And, so I've been wanting to do this for a long time and you and I have talked about it and we're like, yeah, we'll get to it one day. And it wasn't until Chris Heaslip, our executive chairman, said, guys, like you've been talking about this for too long. It's time to do it and put a fire under our butts to get it done. And I think for me, that was a good example of me choosing the firefighting over a strategic initiative to really move our business forward.
It was embarrassing, right? I think so. Last month was your 3-year anniversary with Leadr.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure we could go back and look at our one-on-one notes, but I'm pretty sure we talked about it within the first month of you joining and we were so excited about it. And then was just never a good time. And so the fact that it took our chairman to come in and say, we're doing a podcast and we had every excuse under the sun. I remember back in January, it was like, I've got a baby coming and then I'm coming back. And then almost immediately after that, you've got a baby coming. It's like, this is, of all the worst times, this is the worst time. And Chris was like, nope. And here we are doing it. And it was the right thing, but it was actually embarrassing. I don't know. Is there a better word than embarrassing? I just felt like.
No, I think it's embarrassing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I hated that. Chris had to parachute in and tell us like focus on strategic things, don't just get stuck in the firefighting.
Yeah, well, one thing he says, I think I've learned this from you, but I think you said you learned it from him, was the phrase, if your manager has to ask you, then you're already behind.
Yeah.
And I think that's an example of that, because it's not from a micromanagement perspective, it's from are you actually focused on the right strategic things perspective.
Yes. And sometimes it takes someone that's a little out of the details to see the bigger picture to remind you of don't just focus on today, look at tomorrow.
Yes, 100%. Yep. I was just talking to someone who is kind of like, I guess, mid-level in the org at her company. And we were talking through that tension. I think this is specifically hard for mid-level managers. Because they're in that player coach role. So many of, and we're at a startup. And so even you as a CEO often are pulled into the weeds more than an average CEO would be at like a massive company.
Right.
But the conversation we were having was like, okay, this feels like a small thing, but when I'm focused on all of these other big things over here, and we were just talking about how like, it's both, like you have to do both well, but the big takeaway for me in that part of the conversation was just that our team should be doing the firefighting, not us as the leader. Not to say that we can't go in and help fight the fire, but we shouldn't be on the front lines every single time there's a fire. We have to be focused on those 4 to 5 things.
What if you're better at firefighting than they are?
You've told me this before, then that means you haven't hired or built your team well, because you haven't hired people that are better than you. And
Right.
that's, I think, the a good leader hires people on their team that are better than them, or maybe we should say, compliments them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you're the one that's constantly pulled into the weeds, that's on you as a leader.
Yep.
I'm saying that for myself.
No, me too. This podcast, I think we're learning is for you and me.
Yeah, I know. It's our therapy session.
My
Uh,
Andy Stanley has this quote: the most powerful 2 lines in leadership are "you decide." And I think not only are they the most powerful lines, I think as the person sharing them, they're also the hardest to say because you want to be the one to be involved. I don't know about you. I want to roll my sleeves up and get in the weeds. I want to be involved in the decision. I want to be able to be the one that was like, I was in the project group that came up with the idea to build the podcast. But actually the power of delegation, even to someone that's new or ramping or maybe doesn't have all the context that you do, if you can delegate it and delegate that firefighting, I think how much more effective can we all be?
So good. Okay, so the hottest take that I think Frank had in those few minutes that we just listened to was the fact that you are not getting the truth. Like as the CEO, you're not getting the full truth from your executive team. Like, what? So I would like, how do you feel? You're a CEO. You have, I mean, we have 4 of us are on the executive team with you. How did that sit with you? And do you agree or disagree?
I want to disagree. And when I first took the role, I thought nothing was going to change because I didn't feel like, because I'd been at Leadr, I suppose I'd been here for about 18 months. And then Chris handed the baton over and I was the CEO. And I personally didn't feel like anything had shifted. I already in my head had felt like I was thinking like a CEO. I already, in many respects, had the responsibilities of a CEO. And so I was like, a title's not going to change anything. But the funny example that I shared was I did notice one thing that week was that everybody started laughing at my jokes.
Yep.
And Kaisa, my wife, was like, "You're not that funny." And so I did notice that there's something about the title, and I think it's not even just the CEO title. I think titles do this to people in general. It creates a barrier, it creates a wall, and it creates a sense of like seeking affirmation. And that's where all the jokes around like people kissing ass come from, right? And so yeah, you do kind of have to watch for it and you do need to mind for conflict and you do need to be open to people telling you you're wrong and that you're stupid and you have to show that there's no consequences for them doing that. But that's a journey. That takes so much time for people to be able to stand up to the CEO. So I've noticed it and it's a challenge.
Yeah. I recently, well, I had an SVP title, but then recently was promoted to CMO. Thank you, Matt. But yeah, I notice it all the time. I go into meetings and I'm like, why is everybody on mute? Or like, why does
It's a
it
thing.
like, yes. And it's, I have to remind myself that my opinion carries 10 times the weight that I think it does. Or my voice. I shouldn't say necessarily my opinion, but like my voice in a meeting or in an email or over Slack. So yeah, how do you counteract that, knowing that you're not hearing necessarily the full truth from your executive team? He says you got to go figure it out yourself.
Right.
How has that looked like for you as the CEO?
I think, well, there's one right there. Like jump to the details. If you're not feeling like you're getting what you need, inspect what you expect. You have to inspect what you expect. If you're not sure, go and do some data digging. But the other part is kind of what I just touched on around like you have to be okay with people telling you, that you're wrong, that you're stupid, that you've made the right decision. And that has to be sort of encouraged as a part of your culture. And so there's a few ways you could do that. You could do that through vulnerability, building trust, right? As a leader, being the first one to admit that you're wrong or being the first one to say, I don't know. I think that's a powerful stance to take. You can't always say I don't know because otherwise why are you in the position?
Yeah.
But I think it's really powerful as the leader to admit, I don't have all the answers. I'm not entirely sure. And then I think opening the opportunity in small group environments for people to tell you that they're wrong and letting their colleagues and peers see how you react to that. I think that is probably the most important thing. Like, and I think we've been doing this better as an executive team this year. Would you say, Holly, that yes. I will mind for conflict. I think I'll say something to the effect of like, what are you thinking right now? Like I get something stirring, like let's not gloss over this. What are you trying to say? And everyone's like, oh, I don't know if I should. And then you say it. And if I come down like a ton of bricks, it'll never happen again. Yeah. But if we encourage it and inspire it, the conversation breathes.
It's so true. Well, even I don't remember what we were talking about on the phone the other day, but we were catching up at the end of the day, and I was kind of tiptoeing around something, and you're like, just say it, Holly. Like really encouraging me to just say it. And so that's very helpful for the leader to set the tone, because it provides that psychological safety for other people to open up. Yeah.
And hey, especially if you have worked for that leader that is toxic, or that is quite authoritarian, or very dictatorial, you've kind of got that baggage associated with it. So it's going to take a lot of time to unwind like what is healthy and unhealthy respect for leadership.
This happened to me just 2 days ago, in a one-on-one. I was asking my teammate to be more direct with me, because I love black and white. Like I don't do very well in the gray. It's funny because I feel like I do well in gray as far as like if it's external, but if it's between me and a person, I'm like, are you mad at me? Are you like, what's going on? And I was asking her to be more direct with me, because I could tell there was some tension, and we were trying to sort it out, and it just felt like we kept going around and around in circles. And she said, Holly, that's a big ask, because she's had a traumatic former experience with a leader. Yeah. And so it was just a good reminder for me. I'm like, be more direct with me as the CMO, and she's like, I hear you and I will work on it, but also just know what you're asking. And I didn't know. To me, it wasn't a big ask, but it is a big ask for our teams to be fully vulnerable with us all the time. So
I had a mentor say to me once, similar environment, we didn't work together, but I had a huge amount of respect for this guy. His name's Ross. And we were having a similar conversation. He's like, how you doing, Matt? And I'm like, I'm fine. He's like, how are you really doing? I'm like, I'm okay. He's like, no, just tell me how you're really doing. And there was this like hesitancy of like, I don't really want to open up, because I don't want to lose face in front of someone that I really respect and look up to. And he said this thing to me, is so powerful. He's like, Matt, I suffer from short-term memory complex. He's like, whatever you share, like, I'm not going to carry that, and that's not going to like reframe my opinion of you, Matt. We share things, we bring them on the table, we're open about it, and then we move on. He's like, I'm not going to bring this up. I'm not going to like be an archaeologist. What's the term? Archaeologist? Indiana Jones. I'm not going to be Indiana Jones and like dig up the thing you told me last month. And I think that's what people are afraid of, is like, if I say this, it's going to come back up again. And he said, no, I've got short-term memory complex. And that freed me up to be a lot more open with him.
That is so good. That I love that that he shared it like that, because then you were like, okay, cool. Well, let's test it out. And then here's the thing, the way he responds the first time is critical to you continuing to believe that he means that. Because plenty of leaders, I think, will say, like, you can trust me. I had a leader one time say, you can cash in, or I need to cash in some trust chips here. And we were like, what? Like, that's not it.
Interesting.
But instead leading with vulnerability and responding in a way that's like, no big deal. Let's move on.
No big deal. And it's not going to be in my HR file. It won't turn up in my performance review. Like, that's, I think, what a lot of people worry about.
So true. Okay, so some actionable insights that I took away. Let's see if I forgot anything from this. I think that was only like 6 minutes with Frank, and it felt like a masterclass. So first of all, it's your job as the leader to pick the 4 to 5 gears, not to firefight. Second, your team, you should have a team around you that are the firefighters. The third one is be aware that you might not be hearing the full truth from your team, and it's your job to go to the front lines and figure it out, which we're going to unpack that a little bit more in our next episode of like really what that looks like. And then I think, something that you just shared here at the end that's so critical is leading with that vulnerability as the leader is what's going to create that openness and vulnerability with the rest of your team. So yeah, I think those were 4 good actionable insights that I learned and took away today. Anything I missed?
I need to go back and listen to him yet again, because I even right now, I'm like, what's the next fire that I can fight? And that's not what I should be doing.
That's right. That is right. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Did you know that we send out a weekly email called Leadr Pulse? You can subscribe to it on our website, leadr.com. That's leadr.com. It's got actionable insights for leaders revolutionizing the world of work. So if you're enjoying this podcast, check out our website and subscribe to our weekly email. Now, you also might not know that Matt and Chris, our co-founders, they wrote a book called Management is Dead. It's all about this topic of creating a revolution around the ROI of people development. You can check it out at managementisdead.com. You can order your copy anywhere books are sold, and make sure that you order it, read it with your team. It's jam-packed full of insights for you to be the best leader that you can be. We'll see you next time on the Leadr Pulse podcast.